Right now, somewhere in a basement vault in Istanbul, there is a piece of gazelle skin that should not exist. It was drawn in 1513. It shows a coastline that would not be officially discovered for another 300 years. In Washington, inside the Library of Congress, there is a French map from 1531 that depicts rivers flowing across a continent buried under 2 miles of ice. In a Venetian archive, there is a chart from the 14th century that shows Greenland with a level of detail that would not be matched for another 200 years. In Paris, there is a map that shows Antarctica split into 2 land masses, a fact that would not be confirmed by seismic equipment until 1958. And connecting all of them, there is a theory so radical that Albert Einstein himself wrote a foreword endorsing the research behind it. 5 maps, 5 impossibilities, drawn by different people, in different centuries, in different countries, and not one satisfying explanation for any of them.
I know how that sounds. Trust me, I had the same reaction when I first came across this. But I spent weeks digging into each one of these maps, checking the dates, the sources, the science, and what I found, honestly, shook me. Welcome back. Today we are opening the files on 5 ancient maps that show geographical knowledge that should have been impossible for their time. And I am not going to tell you what to think. I am going to show you the evidence, the theories, and what modern science actually says. And you can decide for yourself.
Istanbul, 1929. A German theologian named Gustav Adolf Diesmann is cataloging old documents in the basement of the Topkapi Palace when he stumbles upon a rolled piece of gazelle skin parchment. It is roughly 90 centimeters long and 60 centimeters wide, faded, cracked, and covered in annotations written in Ottoman Turkish. The date inscribed on the map reads year 919 in the Muslim calendar. That translates to 1513 in the Western calendar. The signature belongs to an Ottoman admiral named Ahmed Muhyiddin Piri, known as Piri Reis. He was a seasoned navigator, a former privateer who sailed with his uncle Kemal Reis, and eventually rose to command the Ottoman fleet in the Indian Ocean. In the margins, Piri wrote that he used over 20 source maps to compile this chart. 8 Ptolemaic maps, 4 Portuguese charts, an Arabic map of India, and, most remarkably, a map drawn by Christopher Columbus himself, passed down through his uncle who had personally sailed with the Genoese explorer. Only a fragment of Piri's original world map survived. But that fragment was enough to ignite a firestorm. Because along the bottom edge of the map, stretching below South America, there is a landmass, a detailed coastline with bays, inlets, and what appear to be mountain ranges. A landmass that looks unmistakably like the northern coast of Antarctica. 300 years before the continent was officially sighted in 1820.
Let that sink in for a moment. 300 years. That is like someone today drawing a perfect map of the surface of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, without a telescope. And the details are what get you. Piri's calculations along the African coastline are accurate to within 80 kilometers. On a map drawn on animal skin over 500 years ago. And the craziest part? He openly told us where he got his information. He listed his sources. He was not trying to hide anything. So the real question is not what Piri knew, it is what his sources knew. And that is where things get truly unsettling.
The theory did not take long to emerge. In 1965, Professor Charles Hapgood from the University of New Hampshire published a book called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. His argument was explosive. He claimed the southern landmass on Piri's map was not just any coastline. It was Antarctica, as it appeared before the ice. Hapgood's team compared the map to seismic data gathered during the 1949 Norwegian-British-Swedish Antarctic expedition and concluded that the coastline of Queen Maud Land matched Piri's depiction. He went further. He proposed that Piri's source maps traced back to an advanced prehistoric maritime civilization, one that had charted the entire globe thousands of years before the Egyptians, before the Sumerians, before recorded history even began. Defenders of alternative history seized the claim. Writers like Graham Hancock built entire careers around it. But mainstream cartographers pushed back hard. Geologist Paul Heinrich pointed out that Hapgood conflated the topography of Antarctica beneath the ice with what an ice-free Antarctica would actually look like, ignoring a critical process called isostatic rebound, where land that has been compressed under miles of ice would rise dramatically once that weight was removed. Modern ice core data shows that Antarctica has been covered in ice for at least 10 million years. Not 6,000, not 12,000, 10 million. Other scholars offered a simpler explanation. The southern landmass on the map is not Antarctica at all. It is the coast of Patagonia, the southern tip of South America, drawn at an angle because Piri ran out of space on the parchment and bent the coastline to fit. The map does show South America and Africa connected at the south, which makes no geographical sense unless the lower portion is simply a continuation of the South American coast, distorted and folded eastward.
And here is what fascinates me the most. Even if Antarctica is not on that map, even if it is just bent Patagonia, the map is still extraordinary. The accuracy of the South American coastline, drawn just 21 years after Columbus first crossed the Atlantic, is staggering. Something does not add up. Either Piri had access to exploration data that was far more advanced than what we know existed, or someone before him had already charted those waters with stunning precision. Either way, there is a gap in the story, and that gap is about to get a lot wider. Because 18 years after Piri drew his map, a French mathematician drew another one, and this one is even harder to explain.
1531, Paris. A brilliant mathematician named Oronteus Finaeus, known in Latin as Oronteus Finaeus, publishes a world map. Finaeus is no amateur. He holds the chair of mathematics at the prestigious Collège Royal. He has built ivory sundials, calculated the value of pi, written treatises on astronomy, and invented his own map projection. His 1531 map is a double cordiform projection, heart-shaped, showing the entire known world. And at the bottom, centered on the South Pole, there is a massive continent labeled Terra Australis. But this is not the vague blob that appeared on most maps of the era. This one has detail. Coastal mountains, river systems flowing toward the sea, bays and estuaries where today there are only glaciers, the approximate position of the South Pole, and correct longitudinal coordinates. Charles Hapgood found the map in 1960 in the Library of Congress, where it had been sitting unstudied for years. His team identified 50 geographical points on the Finaeus map, whose latitudes and longitudes were located with remarkable accuracy. The resemblance to modern maps of Antarctica is striking. The Ross Sea, today hidden under a floating ice shelf hundreds of meters thick, appears on the map as an open gulf. Coastal mountain ranges match positions confirmed only by the 1957 International Geophysical Year surveys.
50 geographical points. Accurate latitude and longitude on a map from 1531. To put that in perspective, European sailors at that time could not reliably determine longitude at all. The technology to do it accurately, the marine chronometer, would not be invented for another 230 years. So how did a French mathematician in Paris get it right? The probability of that being coincidence, according to Hapgood's calculations, is astronomically small. But here is where skeptics land a devastating blow.
Critics demonstrated that to make Finaeus's Terra Australis match Antarctica, Hapgood had to rotate the entire depiction by 20 degrees. He had to shift the South Pole by over 1,600 kilometers. And even after those adjustments, the continent on the map was 230% the size of the real Antarctica. That is more than double. Hapgood attributed these discrepancies to errors in the original source maps and claimed that Finaeus confused the 80th parallel south with the Antarctic Circle. But other researchers pointed out something more fundamental: the concept of Terra Australis, a massive southern continent balancing the landmasses of the north, was a theoretical fixture in European cartography since the ancient Greeks. Ptolemy himself proposed it in the 2nd century. Dozens of maps before Finaeus depicted a southern continent. They varied wildly in shape and detail. Finaeus simply drew a more detailed version of a common cartographic convention. The rivers and mountains, critics argued, were educated guesses, extrapolations from reports of icebergs and southern ocean currents, not copies of prehistoric surveys. And yet, the Ross Sea, the coastal mountain ranges, the estuaries where glaciers now sit, core samples taken from the Antarctic seabed have revealed layers of sediment brought down by flowing rivers, dated to roughly 4,000 years before the Common Era. The area was not always frozen. At some point, rivers did flow there. The question is whether anyone was alive to see it, and whether they drew a map.
That is the part that keeps me up at night, because science confirms that rivers once flowed in Antarctica. Sediment proves it, but the mainstream timeline says no human civilization existed that could have charted it. So either Finaeus made an incredibly lucky guess, or somewhere, somehow, someone preserved knowledge that predates everything we think we know. And if 2 maps are not enough to make you uncomfortable, wait until you hear about a third. One that does not come from the south at all. It comes from the frozen north, and its backstory reads like a spy novel.
Venice, 1558. A wealthy patrician named Niccolo Zeno the Younger publishes a book containing letters and a map that he claims were written by his ancestors, the brothers Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, Venetian navigators from the 14th century. According to the narrative, around 1380, the elder Niccolo was shipwrecked on an island called Friesland in the North Atlantic. He entered the service of a prince named Zichmni and spent years exploring the northern seas. His brother Antonio joined him. Together, they allegedly visited Greenland, found a monastery with a geothermal heating system, and heard tales of a civilized land called Estotiland to the west, where the inhabitants possessed books written in Latin. The map accompanying the account shows Greenland, Iceland, Norway, and a constellation of islands scattered across the North Atlantic, including the mysterious Friesland. And here is what makes the map strange. Greenland appears with a level of detail that surpasses every other map produced before the mid-16th century. The coastline is more defined, the interior topography more articulated, almost as if someone had seen it without its ice cap.
Now, the weight of that claim depends entirely on whether you believe the Zeno brothers actually made the voyage. And that is where it gets complicated, because modern historians have found some very inconvenient facts. Venetian court records show that Niccolo was in Greece, standing trial for embezzlement during the exact years he was supposedly exploring the Arctic. He made a will in Venice in 1400 and died there around 1402. Not in Friesland, not in Greenland, in Venice. So the question becomes, is this a record of a real voyage with some details scrambled by time? Or is it a 16th century fabrication designed to give Venice a pre-Columbian claim to the New World?
The evidence against authenticity is substantial. The cartographic style of the Zeno Map matches mid-16th century Venetian print maps, not 14th century navigational charts. Scholars have demonstrated that the younger Zeno drew heavily from contemporary works, including the Carta Marina of Olaus Magnus from 1539. Many of the islands on the map, including Friesland, simply do not exist. When the English explorer Martin Frobisher searched for the Northwest Passage in the 1570s, he sighted what he believed to be Friesland. It was actually the southern tip of Greenland. He landed, claimed the non-existent island for England, and sailed home, further spreading the deception. For over 100 years, Friesland appeared on virtually every major map of the North Atlantic. Mercator used the Zeno Map as a source for his famous 1569 world map. Ortelius included it. Hakluyt reprinted it. It became one of the most successful cartographic hoaxes in history. And yet, the depiction of Greenland on the map is hauntingly detailed. The general outline bears a resemblance that is difficult to dismiss as pure invention. Modern radar surveys have revealed the topography hidden beneath Greenland's ice sheet, a landscape of valleys, mountain chains, and a vast central basin pushed below sea level by the weight of ice 3 kilometers thick. Some proponents argue that the Zeno Map captures echoes of that hidden landscape, as if copied from a source that predates the ice itself. Most scholars reject this interpretation, but the detail remains: a curious ghost in the margin of a probable forgery.
And that is what makes this whole subject so maddening. You can debunk the story and still be left with the map. You can prove the voyage never happened and still not explain how someone in 15th century Venice drew Greenland better than anyone would for another 200 years. It is like finding a modern painting inside a medieval castle. The castle might be fake, but the painting is real. And now we move from the frozen north to the frozen south again. Because in 18th century Paris, a French cartographer drew a map that would not be confirmed by science for over 200 years.
Paris. 1739. Philippe Buache de la Neuville is one of the most respected geographers in France. He serves as geographer to the king. He is a member of the Académie des Sciences. He has pioneered a new form of theoretical geography, using reports from explorers, sailors' journals, and direct astronomical observation to deduce the shape of lands no European has ever seen. And some of his deductions are eerily accurate. He correctly predicted the existence of Alaska and the Bering Strait decades before their official discovery. In 1739, Buache publishes a map of the southern lands. The full title, in French, translates to Map of the Southern Lands Contained Between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Antarctic Pole. And on this map, Antarctica appears not as a single frozen continent, but as two separate landmasses divided by an inland sea. Two islands, a waterway running between them. No ice cap, rivers flowing toward the coast. Mountain ranges in the interior. It is a startling image.
Two landmasses, separated by a waterway. Now here is the part that sends chills down your spine. In 1958, during the International Geophysical Year, seismic surveys of Antarctica confirmed that the continent is indeed composed of two distinct geological masses, Greater Antarctica and Lesser Antarctica, separated by a subglacial basin. Buache drew this over 200 years before the seismic equipment existed to prove it. 200 years. That is not a lucky guess about a coastline. That is a lucky guess about the internal geological structure of a continent buried under 2 miles of ice. So how did he know?
The answer, according to Buache's own notes, is deduction. The map itself provides clues that most proponents of the ancient civilization theory conveniently ignore. Written directly on the map are 2 words, conjecture and soupçonner. Conjectured, suspected. These are not the words of a man copying from ancient sources. They are the words of a scientist forming a hypothesis. Buache reasoned from the reports of explorers like Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet de Lozier, who in 1739 had sailed farther south than almost any European and reported vast fields of icebergs. Buache theorized that those icebergs must come from rivers, and those rivers must flow from mountains. He imagined great waterways cutting through the continent, with icebergs breaking off and drifting north through two straits. It was brilliant deductive reasoning, built not on ancient maps, but on careful analysis of the few data points available. His predecessor, Guillaume de Lisle, had used similar methods. The concept of a southern continent dated back to Aristotle in the 4th century before the Common Era. The idea that the icebergs had to come from somewhere was sound. And yet, there is a problem with the debunking too. Critics point out that we cannot actually know what an ice-free Antarctica would look like. Modern maps of the subglacial topography show the land as it is right now, crushed under countless millions of tons of ice. Remove that ice, and two things happen. Sea levels rise, drowning the current coastline, and the land rebounds, pushed upward by as much as 500 meters in some areas, through a process called isostatic rebound. The Antarctica that would emerge from under the ice would look nothing like the Antarctica beneath it. So comparing Buache's map to modern subglacial surveys is, in a sense, comparing two unknowns.
So we are left in a strange place. Buache says he was guessing. His map literally says conjectured. But his guess turned out to be structurally correct about a feature that would not be confirmed for 2 centuries. Maybe he was a genius. Maybe he got lucky. Or maybe, and this is the thought that nobody in mainstream academia wants to touch, maybe the sailors and sources he drew from carried fragments of knowledge that had been passed down, copied, and recopied across centuries, from a time when someone actually saw what lies beneath that ice. And that brings us to the biggest question of all. If these maps do share common ancestors, who drew the originals? One man believed he had the answer, and Albert Einstein thought he might be right.
Keene, New Hampshire, 1966. Charles Hapgood, a history professor at Keene Teachers College, publishes maps of the ancient sea kings. The book is the culmination of 7 years of research conducted with his students, and its central thesis is breathtaking in scope. Hapgood does not argue that Piri Reis discovered Antarctica. He does not claim that Buache had a time machine. His argument is far more radical. He proposes that all of these maps, the Piri Reis, the Finaeus, the Buache, and others like them, are copies of copies of copies, each generation losing some accuracy, each cartographer adding errors, but all tracing back to a single origin. A set of source maps created by an unknown maritime civilization that existed during or before the last ice age. A civilization that charted the entire globe with instruments capable of determining longitude, something Europe would not master until the 18th century. Hapgood was not a fringe figure. He held a master's degree from Harvard. He had worked for the Office of Strategic Services during World War II, and his theory caught the attention of the most famous physicist alive, Albert Einstein. In 1953, Einstein wrote to Hapgood praising his earlier work on Earth crust displacement theory. He called Hapgood's arguments very impressive and said his hypothesis appeared to be correct. Einstein eventually wrote the foreword to Hapgood's first book, published in 1958. In it, Einstein wrote that Hapgood's first communication had electrified him.
Albert Einstein, the man who reshaped our understanding of space, time, and gravity. Writing a foreword for a book about lost civilizations and ancient maps, that alone should make you pause. Now, Einstein was not endorsing ancient astronauts or Atlantis. He was endorsing the scientific methodology. He thought the hypothesis deserved serious investigation. He encouraged Hapgood to gather more geological evidence. And then, Einstein died in April 1955, just weeks after his last letter to Hapgood. The conversation was never finished. But the question Hapgood raised never went away either.
The scientific establishment was not kind to Hapgood. His Earth crust displacement theory was overtaken by plate tectonics in the 1960s. His map interpretations were systematically challenged. Gregory McIntosh, a cartographic scholar, published a detailed analysis of the Piri Reis Map in 2000 and demonstrated that the southern landmass is most likely a distorted rendering of the South American coast, consistent with other maps of the period. The Bad Archaeology Project, a critical review of pseudo-archaeological claims, dismantled the Finaeus and Buache interpretations point by point. Ice core data buried the timeline. Antarctica has been under ice for millions of years, not thousands. No human civilization, however advanced, could have mapped it ice-free within the span of recorded or even proto-recorded history. And the Portolan charts of the Middle Ages, which Hapgood cited as evidence of ancient source maps, were shown by other scholars to contain common errors that propagated from map to map through simple copying, not because they traced back to a single ancient master chart. The consensus formed. Hapgood was wrong. The maps were products of their time, compilations of available data mixed with theoretical speculation and cartographic convention. The southern continents were versions of Terra Australis, a concept older than Christianity. The accuracy was coincidence, or confirmation bias, or selective comparison. Case closed, except for the questions that linger.
And the questions do linger. How did Piri Reis compile a map of South America with accuracy that rivals charts made decades later? Why does the Finaeus map place mountain ranges in positions that would not be confirmed for 400 years? How did Buache deduce that Antarctica was two land masses separated by a waterway, over 2 centuries before seismology proved him right? Maybe brilliant minds working with limited data sometimes make guesses that turn out to be correct. It has happened before. But 5 times? On 5 different maps? Across 4 centuries? That is either the greatest streak of luck in intellectual history or a pattern that nobody has been able to explain.
The oldest known map in human history is a clay tablet from Babylon, roughly 2,600 years old. It shows the world as a flat disk surrounded by water. We have come a long way since then. We have mapped every centimeter of the Earth's surface with satellites. We have mapped the ocean floor. We have mapped the topography beneath ice sheets 3 kilometers thick. And yet every few decades, someone dusts off an old piece of parchment, holds it up to the light, and the world gets a little less certain. 5 maps. 5 windows into knowledge that should not have existed when it was drawn. Whether they are evidence of an advanced civilization lost to time or extraordinary products of human intuition and deduction, one thing is undeniable. Somebody knew things they were not supposed to know, and they wrote it down, in ink, on animal skin, on paper. They left the evidence in plain sight. The real question is not whether these maps are accurate. It is whether we are brave enough to ask what it means if they are.
Every time I research one of these topics, I walk away with more questions than I started with. And honestly, that is the part I love. Because the moment we stop asking questions, the moment we decide we already know everything, that is the moment we become exactly the kind of civilization that forgets, that loses knowledge, that lets maps crumble in basements for 400 years. Maybe there was an advanced civilization before ours, maybe there was not, but the maps are real, the details are real, and the gaps in our explanations are real too. I am not going to tell you what to believe, but I will tell you this. After weeks of research, I have never looked at a map the same way again. If this made you think, stick around. There is a lot more coming.